The air in the crucible was thick with the scent of blood and sweat, the metallic tang of oil, and the unrelenting roar of an alien crowd. A colossal space station, floating in the far reaches of the galaxy, the arena was a place of torment and spectacle. Here, slaves and mercenaries fought not just for survival, but for the twisted amusement of their masters. For the onlookers, aliens of every shape, size, and color, it was sport. For the fighters, it was nothing more than the endless grind of brutality. Kael stood at the edge of the arena, his hand shackled to the wall behind him, muscles taut, every nerve straining under the weight of expectation. His body, scarred and covered in tattoos, bore the marks of countless battles. His eyes were hard, unreadable, silent. He had long learned that words were weapons that only led to more pain. The slave, the human, the thing that once had a name. Now it was just Kael the fighter. Across the pit, Captain Serika Vorn sauntered into view, her every step laced with the confidence of a woman who had never known fear. She wore the silver armor of the elite, sleek and deadly. And though her cybernetic enhancements were hidden beneath layers of cloth, everyone knew she was more machine than woman. Her posture alone spoke of superiority. She was born to dominate, to lead, to mock those beneath her. She cast her eyes on Kael, her lips curling into a smirk as she approached the center of the arena. "Look at this," she called to the crowd, her voice smooth like honey. "A human, a slave, brought here to entertain us." Her words cut through the air like a whip, laced with disdain. "I should break him quickly. Make it a proper show." The audience jeered, the murmur of their alien tongues rising to a crescendo of approval. Kael did not flinch. He simply stood there, his gaze never leaving hers. He had learned long ago that showing emotion only fueled the fire. Instead, he focused on his breathing, steady, measured. The chains that bound him were tight, but they would be no more than a tool, something to use against her. In time, he would show her the cost of arrogance. Serika stepped forward, her cybernetic limbs clicking with the promise of destruction. She stopped just a few feet from Kael, her gaze sweeping over him, as if she were sizing up a piece of meat. "You know," she said, her voice a low growl now, "I think you're going to be an excellent example of what happens when you forget your place. You'll fight, but you'll fail. And then, I'll do what the others couldn't. I'll break you in front of everyone." Her taunting words were punctuated by a sharp laugh, a sound of cruel amusement that made the crowd respond with cheers. They were hungry for the spectacle, hungry for Kael's humiliation. Kael's chains rattled as he shifted his weight slightly. There was no need for response. Serika was already too far gone in her delusions of superiority. She couldn't see what he saw, didn't understand that to him. There was no distinction between winning and losing. There was only surviving, only finding a way to stay alive. And in this fight, this one will be different. Serika's eyes narrowed, and without another word, she raised her arm, her fingers crackling with energy as the audience went wild. The hum of her cybernetic enhancements filled the air like the prelude to a storm. With a sharp movement, she tossed her cloak aside, revealing the full extent of her gear, blades, gauntlets, and the sleek body that had been enhanced and remade to perfection. She was a predator. Kael, on the other hand, was a shadow, a whisper, a promise of vengeance. The guards released the chains binding Kael to the wall, and he stepped forward, his bare feet sinking into the sand. The heat of the arena pressed in on him, but he barely felt it. His mind was clear, his focus sharp. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need to challenge her with words. He would show her, just as he had shown countless others, the true meaning of strength. "Are you ready?" Serika's voice cut through the tension, a mockery of a question. Kael didn't respond. He simply stood still, watching her every movement, every twitch of muscle. In her arrogance, she would underestimate him. That was all he needed. "Then let's see how long you last," she sneered. Serika charged forward with a speed that made the audience gasp, her cybernetic limbs pushing her faster than any human could ever hope to match. But Kael was already in motion, moving with a fluidity that belied his chains. He ducked beneath her first strike, a blow that would have cleaved a normal man in two, and retaliated with a brutal swing of his chained wrists, the metal links whistling through the air. The crowd gasped as the chains wrapped around her waist, pulling her off balance. She staggered but regained her footing, her eyes blazing with fury. "You think these pathetic chains can stop me?" she hissed, launching herself back into the fight. Kael said nothing. His silence was the only answer he needed to give. With a fluid motion, he used the chains to swing himself closer to her, landing a blow to her exposed side with a ferocity that made her stumble. The crowd's roar intensified as Serika's smug confidence began to falter. She countered quickly, her cybernetics pushing her back to her feet, but Kael was relentless. He moved like a shadow, never speaking, never slowing. The chains were no longer just shackles. They were weapons, extensions of his will, tools of survival. With each swing, each strike, Serika's control over the fight slipped further away. Serika's confidence was crumbling, and it was clear to her now. This was no mere human. This was something far more dangerous. The fight, in the end, was not about strength, speed, or even skill. It was about who could remain focused, who could endure the longest. Kael had long ago learned that the fight didn't end when the blood spilled. It ended when the mind broke. And he would not break. As Serika lunged at him again, Kael's chains lashed out, wrapping around her legs and pulling her to the ground. She gasped, her eyes wide with shock as Kael moved in close, standing above her, silent as ever. The crowd fell into a stunned silence. Serika's pride, her arrogance, her belief in her invincibility had been shattered. She looked up at him, the weight of her failure heavy in the air between them. For the first time, her eyes met his, and she saw the truth that lay there, a quiet, unrelenting strength. Kael didn't speak. He didn't need to. The fight was over. The sound that marked the start of the match was a deep, resonant pulse, like the heartbeat of the arena itself. It echoed through the chamber, sending a hush rippling over the crowd as all eyes turned to the combatants. Serika Vorn took a step forward, silver armor gleaming under the harsh lights, her expression a sculpted mask of confidence. The cybernetic servos in her legs whirred faintly as she crouched into a ready stance, arms loose at her sides, fingers flexing in anticipation. Across from her, Kael remained motionless, the long iron chains still draped from his wrists, their ends trailing in the sand like forgotten weapons. His bare chest rose and fell steadily. There was no hint of fear in his face, no acknowledgement of the spectacle unfolding around him. He stared at her with the calm of someone who had already accepted everything: pain, loss, even death. Serika grinned, a tight, mirthless smile. She was going to enjoy this. She lunged forward in a blur of motion, cybernetically enhanced legs propelling her across the pit with terrifying speed. Her right fist crashed toward Kael's head in a sweeping arc, her knuckles crackling with kinetic energy. The crowd roared, already imagining the slave crumpling under the blow. But Kael moved. He ducked low, the punch skimming just inches from his head, and spun with the momentum, the chains on his arms swinging out wide. One end caught Serika's thigh, the sharp clink of metal against alloy barely audible over the crowd's gasp. Her momentum faltered, just slightly, but Kael surged forward in that moment, the chain snapping taut as he yanked her legs out from under her. She hit the ground hard, shoulder first, sand spraying upward as she rolled to her feet, now more surprised than hurt. "You fight like a dog," she spat, already circling him again. "All instinct. No art." Kael said nothing. He rotated his wrists, looping the chains in a practiced coil, eyes locked on her. Every movement was precise, quiet, methodical. Serika came in slower this time, more measured. She jabbed low, feinted high, testing his reactions. He parried with the chains, blocking one strike, then sidestepping the next. He didn't attack. Not yet. He was learning her rhythm, watching how she shifted her weight, how the implants in her arms delayed her punches by a fraction of a second. She noticed the restraint and mistook it for hesitation. "Come on," she shouted, lunging again, this time with a sweeping kick aimed to crush his ribs. Kael caught the leg mid-swing. His arms tightened, chains wrapping around her calf like a snare, and he twisted sharply. Serika cried out as she was lifted and slammed into the ground again, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. Before she could rise, Kael's foot pinned her wrist, just long enough to disarm the blade hidden in her forearm. The crowd roared with approval, some standing now, their amusement shifting into awe. This wasn't a one-sided display of dominance. This was something new, something thrilling. Serika rolled away, coughing, fury burning in her eyes. "I should have gutted you in your cage," she hissed. "You're not a man. You're a malfunction that needs correcting." Kael advanced with quiet purpose. His chains dragged in the sand with each step, leaving lines that looked almost ceremonial, like ancient glyphs of war. Serika struck again, throwing a flurry of punches, each faster than the last. Sparks flew as her knuckles grazed his chains, but he deflected every blow, his body weaving through her attacks like smoke. She finally landed a hit, one solid blow to his side that made him grunt. But even then, he didn't slow. Serika overextended. That was all he needed. Kael spun behind her, looped the chains around her torso, and pulled tight. She thrashed, trying to break free, but the chains had locked across her chest, pinning her arms at her sides. With a heave, he lifted her off the ground and slammed her back first into the arena wall. The echoing crack made several spectators recoil. Pinned, stunned, and gasping, Serika clawed at the chains as he stepped back. She sagged to her knees, trying to push herself upright, but her limbs were trembling now. Her pride had taken deeper damage than her body. She looked up at him, face smeared with sand and blood. "Say something," she snarled. "You think silence makes you strong?" Kael looked down at her. His breathing was heavy, but his face remained unreadable. For a brief second, his fingers tightened on the chains. One final motion that could end it, crush her throat, seal the victory completely. But he didn't. He turned and walked away. The crowd exploded. Voices screamed from every tier of the arena, a riot of disbelief and exhilaration. The match was his, clearly, yet Kael chose not to finish it. He had no interest in triumph, no desire to stand above her as a champion. His silence, weaponized throughout the fight, became something greater than defiance. It became judgment. Serika sat in the sand, humiliated, broken in a way no scar or implant could mend. She had underestimated him, mocked him, spit on him, and in 30 brutal seconds, he had dismantled her without uttering a word. Kael reached the exit of the pit, the guards standing aside, unsure whether to restrain him or salute. He paused only once, glancing back toward the arena, not at Serika, but at the watching masses. The chains still dangled from his wrists, glinting in the light. Then he was gone. The corridors beneath the crucible were silent save for the rhythmic hiss of ventilation ducts and the distant murmur of the crowd, still echoing through the metal bones of the station. Kael walked with steady steps, the chains on his wrists now coiled and fastened behind his back, more symbol than shackle. Blood smeared the side of his torso from Serika's final strike, but he paid it no mind. Pain was familiar, almost grounding. Guards cleared a path, unsure whether he was still prisoner or victor. That uncertainty followed him like a second shadow. He hadn't been granted freedom. No one truly left the crucible, but the match had changed something. The audience no longer saw a slave. They saw something far more dangerous, a man who could not be controlled. In a dim holding cell at the far end of the combat wing, Serika Vorn sat alone. Her armor had been removed, revealing deep bruises beneath the enhancements. Technicians had patched up her shoulder and replaced one damaged implant. But her injuries weren't just physical. Her pride had been eviscerated, her reputation hanging by threads. She stared at the floor, eyes hollow. The hum of the door locking behind her barely registered until Kael stepped into the room. Her head snapped up. "You." The word was spat like venom. Kael remained just inside the doorway. A guard stood behind him, tense, pulse rifle aimed low but ready. No one trusted him alone now. Serika rose to her feet, unsteady but defiant. "You think this proves something?" she demanded. "That you're free? You're still theirs. You're still a thing." Kael's voice, when it finally came, was low and rough, like a blade dragged over stone. "You never asked why I was here." The simplicity of the statement disarmed her. She folded her arms, hiding the slight tremor in her fingers. "Why should I? Slaves fight. That's what you're bred for." "I wasn't bred," he replied. "I was captured. 10 years ago. I was a soldier on Avars Prime." Serika blinked. That war had been buried under layers of political spin and rewritten history. The Dominion had declared it a cleansing operation. She had believed it. Most did. Kael took a step forward. They slaughtered the colonies, burned the forests. I was sent to evacuate civilians. Instead, I was sold. By your command structure. Branded. Given to this place. "Lies," she muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. Kael said nothing, watching the flicker of uncertainty pass through her features. She had always believed herself righteous, an enforcer of order. But now, faced with the evidence of her own hand in his suffering, she faltered. "I didn't sell you." "No," Kael said, "but you called me slave, and you spat in my face." Serika's jaw clenched. "I was trying to provoke you. It was part of the match." Kael tilted his head. "And you succeeded." They stood in silence, a gulf of understanding slowly bridging between them. For Serika, it wasn't just the loss in the arena that haunted her. It was the look in Kael's eyes afterward. Not hate, not triumph. Something colder. Judgment without anger. Pity without forgiveness. "I don't want your mercy," she said, voice tightening. "You have it anyway," Kael replied. She recoiled, as if slapped. He turned to leave, but her voice halted him at the threshold. "What happens now?" Kael didn't look back. "Now you decide what kind of person you are, when no one's watching." Then he was gone. That night, Serika didn't sleep. Her thoughts spun in endless circles. Her defeat had been absolute, but her humiliation had been precise. She couldn't shake the weight of it. Not because she had lost, but because of how she had lost. Not to brute strength, but to a man who should have hated her and didn't. Elsewhere, in the command tower above the arena, two figures watched Kael's performance replay on a holographic feed. One was tall, draped in crimson robes, and crowned with a circlet of biowire. The other, leaner, wore a Dominion officer's uniform without insignia. "He's dangerous," said the officer. The robed man smiled faintly. "So was the last prophet. We burned his world, and yet his words live on. He's not preaching. He's fighting. Same effect." The crowd saw more than blood. They saw defiance. The officer frowned. "What do you propose?" "Another match," the robed man said, "but not against a soldier." "Who then?" The robed man turned to face the window, watching Kael's form disappear into the shadows below. "Against something he can't beat. Something that breaks his silence." The officer nodded slowly. "And if he wins again?" The smile returned, colder now. "Then we stop using chains and start using myths." The officer left to make preparations. The robed man remained, watching the arena with narrowed eyes. Kael was more than a spectacle now. He was becoming a symbol, and symbols were dangerous. Back in his cell, Kael sat on the cold bench, staring at his hands. Blood had dried on his knuckles, cracking at the seams of old scars. He was alone again, but something had shifted. The silence that had once protected him now felt heavier, not empty, but full, carrying all the things left unsaid. Tomorrow, they would call him out again. He didn't need to know the opponent. It didn't matter. Every match was the same beneath the flash and ceremony. Survive, remember, endure. But as he closed his eyes, Serika's voice echoed in his thoughts, not in hatred, but in confusion. He had left her alive, and that, more than victory, had changed everything. Kael stood once more in the pit, but this time the air felt different, denser, charged with something beyond anticipation. The crowd was larger, noisier, more frenzied. Whispers of his previous match had ignited something combustible, all wrapped in rumor, reverence tied to rebellion. He was no longer just a curiosity. He was an idea, and ideas were harder to kill. No chains bound him now. The handlers hadn't dared. They let him walk freely to the center of the arena, trusting that whatever spectacle they had prepared would be enough to contain him. He looked up. High above, behind layered glass and reinforced walls, the Dominion overseers watched like gods, peering down from their false Olympus. One of them leaned forward, gesturing. A series of hydraulic locks hissed. A section of the arena wall retracted. Kael's breath slowed. The figure that stepped out wasn't human. It walked on two legs, but the resemblance ended there. Its body was encased in an exo-frame of deep matte black, like a skeletal machine wrapped around muscle. Its head was smooth, featureless, save for a single vertical slit glowing white-blue. The crowd quieted as it entered, some recognizing it from whispered stories of black sites and forgotten wars. This wasn't a combatant. It was a test. Kael didn't flinch. He recognized the thing immediately, not by its name, which had been buried in classified vaults, but by the way it moved. Efficient, silent, merciless. A Dominion revenant, one of the synthetic enforcers deployed when organic life was deemed inefficient. They weren't supposed to exist anymore. He stepped forward, rolling his shoulders, and bent to pick up a short length of chain left half buried in the sand. The arena doors slammed shut behind the machine with a finality that told the crowd what they needed to know. This was no performance. This was an execution. The revenant lunged first, an impossible blur of motion. Kael dodged sideways, barely escaping the sweeping arc of a metal claw. It sliced through the air where his head had been, carving a trench into the sand. The speed was unlike anything he'd faced. This wasn't about reading his opponent. It was about surviving each second. Kael retaliated with a sharp strike, wrapping the chain around his arm and aiming for the revenant's exposed joint. It struck true, sparks flying, but the creature didn't react. No pause, no pain. It simply pivoted, backhanding him with such force he crashed into the arena wall, ribs screaming. He dropped to one knee, tasting blood. The crowd gasped, watching the myth bleed. But Kael stood. His silence wasn't defiance anymore. It was focus, a shield against panic. Every breath, every step was calculated. He baited the revenant in again, feinted right, then struck low, looping the chain around its ankle and yanking. It fell, but even in falling, it was efficient, tucking into a roll and rising without hesitation. He needed more. A memory surged, training on Avers Prime. The way his commander drilled them to fight superior enemies. Don't challenge the strength. Star the system. Make it overwork. Make it adapt until it breaks. Kael circled the revenant, pushing it with jabs and feints, forcing it to move, to turn, to redirect its weight over and over. Its responses remained precise, but he could see it now. Microscopic delays. Imperceptible hesitations building like pressure behind glass. The crowd began to notice too. He struck again, not to damage, but to provoke. The revenant swung harder, faster, its attack patterns increasing in complexity. But Kael knew complexity was a mask. Systems designed for perfection often collapsed under sustained unpredictability. He dropped low, slid under a strike, and vaulted onto its back, wrapping the chain around the Revenant's neck module. Not to choke, but to restrict the rotation of its sensor suite. The synthetic staggered, attempting to counterbalance. Kael held tight, driving his heel into a power conduit at its spine. A shudder ran through it. Then it erupted in violent resistance, flinging him off with brute force. Kael landed hard, his shoulders screaming in protest. But he had seen what he needed. The Revenant had limits. He rose, breathing hard, chest heaving. The next assault was pure instinct. He dodged the first strike, parried the second with his injured arm, and slammed his chain-wrapped fist into the fractured conduit again. The Revenant convulsed. A whine built in its chest, an overloading core. Kael drove his elbow into the weak point, once, twice, then again. The Revenant collapsed. Silence gripped the arena. Smoke hissed from its body, the glow from its eyes slit flickering, fading. Kael staggered back, swaying on his feet. His muscles trembled. He expected the crowd to erupt. But they didn't. They rose. In silence. Tens of thousands, standing not in celebration, but in recognition. Not of violence. Not of victory. Of defiance. Of freedom. Up in the tower, the robed overseer turned from the window, face pale. The officer at his side stared in disbelief. He shouldn't have one. He did. The overseer stepped back. This changes everything. Kael stood alone in the pit, the shattered Revenant at his feet, the broken chain still looped around his arm. He looked up, not at the overseers, not at the guards, but at the people. And for the first time in a decade, he spoke. "I am not your slave." The words echoed louder than any chant, sharper than any blade. And the silence that followed, it was the sound of something ending, and something far greater beginning.